Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is show number 210. It's Sunday, 30th of January, the last weekend in the winter month here before we move into February. And it's actually a lovely sunny day here in London. It's a bit crisp outside. Yesterday was much milder, but a bit breezy. Pretty windy up north, I gather. But it's rather still today and rather nice out there. So we've got a fair amount to cover today. What are we looking at? London e-scooters are going to get sound if development of a new research project goes according to plan. Cyprus is apparently getting tough on learners and with adding compulsory bike clothing rules. I'll look at that in a moment. The Hampshire are aiming to replace some of their traffic bollards with ones made from sugarcane. Positive COVID test for Ducati's Jack Miller has disrupted their MotoGP launch event. The Shiny Side Up live shows, I put lives, I notice in my header, their live shows have been cancelled due to COVID, so the only Shiny Side Up event will be online, but it's a promise to be a biggie. Some historic some movie footage of Burt Munro has been uncovered down in New Zealand too. And today's discussion point will undoubtedly get the juices flowing because I will be asking why bikers are so smug. I'm sure that'll upset a few. But meanwhile, stay with me for the next 30 odd minutes. Don't forget, if you have any comments, any questions, do add them and I'll try to get to them during the show. If I can't manage it during the show, I will respond after the show. Anything you want us to say, do drop me a line. Who have we got looking in this morning? We've got quite a few people here saying hello. Nick, Sue, Kevin, Nigel, and Kevin are all here. Although one of you seems to have disappeared because I see only 4 viewers at the moment and 5 people said hello. So hopefully you've just got a minor connection problem and you'll be back in a moment. Right, so as I said, we've got plenty to crack on with. So I'll just start by reminding you of the live February webcast event. As you probably know by now, I am running a series of online talk shows once a month, first Wednesday of every month. So the next event is Wednesday, the 2nd of February, and I'll be looking at science of being seen. And the other thing probably, again, you know, if you're a regular here, what I'm doing with Science of Being Seen over the next 12 months is I'll be doing alternate shows. One will be a full presentation with the latest research, and every alternate show will be a look at a particular area within Science of Being Seen, but in rather more depth than I normally cover in a presentation. So on Wednesday, what I'll be looking at is trying to give you some additional insights really into the problems of actually seeing objects and why it is that things that are in our line of sight, basically, or in our field of vision, I should say more accurately, aren't always seen. We tend to think of something, if it's visible, we'll see it, but that's simply not the case. Ask any person using camouflage, for example. So that is Wednesday, the 2nd of February. Do pop along to that if you possibly can. The information that you need is here. You can book up on the link which I have just popped up on screen for you. Right, okay. Sue said it's impossible not to feel smug just climbing on your bike. Well, to have fun is one thing, as we'll get onto that in a moment, Sue. Right, okay, so on with some news. A frequent complaint of road users generally is that electric vehicles are too quiet, although I'm not entirely sure this applies to cars and bikes. I mentioned that the Zeros that I road tested a couple of years ago now create a rather interesting whine. It sounds rather like a jet engine spooling up, actually. If you've sat in an aeroplane and heard the engine start, that's pretty much what the Zero sounds like as it accelerates up the road. And it was certainly loud enough to get someone mowing his lawn to look round to see what was coming. And just the other night, actually, I was waiting to cross the road when two cars passed me. I actually didn't hear the first car. It was a petrol-engined car. The second car was actually a electric vehicle, and that actually was whining just like the Zero, and it was actually rather easier to hear. But the e-scooters and the e-cycles come to that, with their much smaller electric motors, are actually almost totally silent. So now University College has actually been tasked with creating what's termed an audible alert to be used by e-scooters to help warn pedestrians that a rider is approaching in London. Now, there have been concerns expressed since the launch of the London Hire e-scooters, which went live last June, that pedestrians, and particularly blind pedestrians, are at risk of being involved because of collisions, because these devices are so quiet. Now, to put it into perspective, the count at the moment stands at more than 500,000 trips have been made on the capital's fleet of e-scooters. There are around 3,600 of them at the moment. So that is quite a lot of trips, and there have been 14 serious injuries reported. And it's not clear from the data whether those involved pedestrians or riders. But that's for the sum of the London trials, which are taking place across 10 boroughs, which includes some pretty busy ones, Camden, Westminster, for example, as well as some slightly less central ones like Ealing and Richmond. Now, the UCL, University College London's Dagenham-based Person Environment Activity Research Laboratory, which is another hideous construction of a name because it spells pearl. They will carry out the work. 3 firms involved in the London rentable e-scooter trial. They are Tier, Lime and Dot. They are working with UCL, and the idea is to produce a universal sound, which it's hoped will be in use at the end of the year, at the latest, after the e-scooter firms themselves and Transport for London choose their favourites. Now, rather than it being a bell or a sort of a horn kind of alarm noise, the idea is apparently to produce a continuously emitted sound as long as the scooter is in motion. Now, Professor Nick Tyler from UCL, he said that they're planning to make the noise fundamentally different to the sort of beeping noise that you hear from sort of reversing vehicles and electric golf buggy people carriers, which are used in airports, for example. And he also points out that the sound doesn't need to be loud, because that, of course, would add to noise pollution generally. But they just want a distinctive sound that people will recognize as coming from an e-scooter. And they hope that eventually the same warning noise will be adopted by all e-scooter firms currently operating in the UK, making e-scooters more easily recognizable to pedestrians when they hear them. Personally, I think they ought to do the same with e-bicycles, and they also need to start sorting out the illegal e-scooter issue as well. Right, okay, moving on from that particular story. Over in Cyprus, it seems things are to get a lot tougher for learner motorcyclists, including the many riders over there who are working for the food delivery industry. Now, I'll be honest and upfront, the news report that I found wasn't the clearest piece of writing in English I've ever seen. And I have to say, I don't write or read Greek, so I have no idea what the original might have said. But this is the gist of it. The measures are in response to criticism that the rules are too lax for learner motorcyclists, especially moped drivers. And the Transport Ministry thereby is toughening driving laws for mopeds and motorcycles, with the aim of reducing the numbers of road accidents involving powered two-wheelers. Now, it seems that most moped riders have not had to pass a practical test nor take any lessons with an instructor. Instead, mopeds and certain types of motorcycles can be ridden on a provisional license after passing a road sign test only. So if you've got a long memory, you'll probably recall the sort of rules that we had in the UK prior to 1982, which basically allowed you to stick L plates on a motorcycle and go riding. So it sounds like it's rather similar to that, but with a sort of a basic theory test. Under the new proposal, learner riders would actually need to be accompanied by a licensed driving instructor, and presumably, although again the report isn't clear on this point, to undertake something similar to CBT, because the next statement in the press release said that the learner license would be valid for only 2 years, after which they would need to take a new test to validate their provisional license again. So that does sound very much like the UK's CBT approach. What's more, it appears that the legislation being proposed will actually require that learner riders, including those who use a moped or motorcycle for work, must wear protective clothing. And it specifies boots, gloves, and knee pads, although what exactly knee pads might be doesn't say whether that means other body armor is necessary. Again, it may be that a journalist simply doesn't know the full ins and outs of what they're writing about. And high visibility vests are also listed as a requirement. And here's something, again, another step. The article also says that mopeds and motorbikes used by delivery services will also have to be equipped with airbags. Now, once again, I assume that these airbags will not be fitted actually to the bike, but they will need to be worn by the rider. And the ministry actually announced that they'll be launching a subsidy plan to help cover the cost of this protective equipment, which will run from this year 2022 to 2024. Now, the proposals still have to be approved by Parliament, but the authorities do not expect that MPs will alter much. So that's quite interesting stuff there from the island of Cyprus. Just a couple of quick questions. One from Nick here. Is this Science of Being Seen the same contents as last time? No, I'm going to be looking in more detail at visual perception. So rather than give you the full talk, which covers visual perception issues, then the conspicuity problems and why it is that high-vis clothing and day riding lights don't work as billed, and then move into the third section of Science of Being Seen, which is proactive responses to those problems. This will be looking directly at how the eye functions, how the visual field works, how we detect objects within the visual field. So I go into much more detail, Nick. That's the whole idea of these in-depth presentations. The next full presentation will be in April. Right, what else have we got here? Kevin has said, I'd be curious to hear comments to the experiences road users since highway code rule changes yesterday. I'll try and cover that on Wednesday, actually, when everybody's had a little bit more time to draw a breath and think about what's happened. And Kevin also says he would call for an immediate prohibition of learner riders using any vehicle in connection with a business. Well, if you'd been on here over the last 2 years, Kevin, you'd have heard me saying that for years. For 2 years, if you had been reading my stuff I've been writing on the internet since 1994, I think, you would know that I've been saying that since 1994. The interesting thing, of course, is that when I was a motorcycle courier, the motorcycle courier firms were under fire in the early 80s for exactly the same issue, that they were allowing riders on L plates to work as motorcycle couriers. And they formed something called the Dispatch Association, and one of the undertakings of the Dispatch Association was not to use learner riders. So that was dealt with by the motorcycle dispatch industry back in the 80s. Unfortunately, the fast food companies are not signatories to that that dispatch association. Pizza Hut, for example, used learner riders on mopeds for many years, and of course the likes of Uber Eats and Deliveroo, of course, are also outside the regulations or outside that association, and there is no compulsory regulation on this. So it's something I've been talking about for a long time. I thoroughly agree with you on that one. Whether anything will happen, I have absolutely no idea. Somehow I very much doubt it. Right, anyway, moving on from those problems, what else can we talk about? Well, here's something of interest to you, I hope, if you're into recyclable materials. Hang on a minute, I've lost my... There it is. I need the button to slide the slide forward. This is a fairly dull looking picture. It's a bollard. Why would I be interested in a bollard? Well, the answer to that is that it's actually made from sugarcane. The move to using these biomaterial posts is that they save cash, they're cheaper, and they supposedly reduce carbon costs. Now, the council says that these new bollards are actually claimed to be resilient. They are said to not splinter when hit, which obviously is fairly important because sharp edges are a potential danger for road users. They also claim not to disrupt the pavement. I assume that's if they are knocked over, they pull out fairly easily. Anyway, polyurethane plastic bollards have been incorporated in incorporating a biopolymer content for some considerable time, and these are made using these sort of biopolymers, biological plastic, basically made from vegetable oils. So I'm guessing that the fanfare being given to these new bollards is that the biopolymers that they are talking about are more likely to have been made from cellulose. Now, cellulose, I'm sure you know, is the sort of woody constituent of plants like trees and sugarcane. Anything with a woody sort of feel to it has got lots of cellulose in it. So why not simply use wood? Well, two reasons, I suspect. Wood's fine where it's not likely to take an impact. For example, if you just want a sort of fence, decorative fence alongside the edge of a road, they're perfect. But a wooden post will snap when hit, and so it doesn't actually stop anything going through it, and it leaves a nasty sharp edged broken thing behind it which needs repairing. Now, bollards like this are more likely to be placed, as you can see, where there is a problem with vehicles mounting a pavement. You can see some tactile pavement there, the yellow painted knobbly stuff. So it's clear that that is a crossing point for pedestrians. Wood also rots relatively quickly, even when treated or painted, and presumably the new bollard will have been treated to stop them biodegrading over a short time frame. But rather less credible, frankly, are the carbon footprint claims that are made. The press release says that the cement industry is responsible for around 7 to 8% of the global carbon dioxide emissions. I have no reason to dispute that, but equally, I hardly think that replacing concrete bollards, even hundreds of concrete bollards across Hampshire, will make much of a dent in that figure, and I doubt it will make much of a dent in the claimed significant contribution to reducing the council's carbon footprint either. Certainly not when compared with all the concrete used for other construction purposes. Now, the news release actually says that when sugarcane grows, it absorbs CO2. This carbon capture actually reduces the carbon levels in the atmosphere, providing a negative carbon footprint. Yes, that's all basic schoolboy stuff, or schoolgirl, I suppose I should say. So it might well be true, but whether the activity of manufacturing the bollards, installing them and maintaining them is going to be carbon free to the same extent, I don't know. Hampshire County Council has committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050, and while the slogan says every little helps, I think actually they probably need a more in-depth look at their carbon footprint plans. Right. Okay. Got several other comments popped in. Sue has said that she thinks that food delivery companies should take more responsibility, and wonders whether they check couriers have a license. Well, that's another story altogether. I certainly heard stories of bikes, insurance, and licenses being shared by individuals. Kevin just says thank you for that info. Nigel says most safety conscious councils employ firms of L riders. Yes, you're absolutely right. Put your money where your mouth is. Get them qualified. How much is it going to cost the council? Um, I don't know, not much, I would have thought. I'm sure if you put all your employees into a CBT school, the CBT school would be only too happy to do you a discount. Martin said, I started motorcycling when a moped that could do 50, 60, could be ridden at age 16. Oh, yes, we all had those Speedos. Yeah, actually, I started on a 125, but my brother had a FS1E, and that was guaranteed to do 45. And yes, I was of that ilk as well, the 250 L's Angel. I remember that. Yes. Yeah, okay. So some interesting comments there by Martin about learning many years ago and e-bike noise. Right. So, okay. Where are we? We're getting a bit lost actually answering all the comments this morning. Good to see comments. So always good to know what people think about these stories I provide you. Don't forget, 11s is Wednesday and Sunday. I'll give you early warning that next Sunday's show will be a recorded one due to the fact that I'm on birthday duty for my other half. I've been strictly told that I am not sitting down at 11 o'clock and going live. So sorry about that, but you will get a recorded show. You can always catch up, whether they are live or recorded, over on my YouTube channel. But don't forget to add the UK to the end of survival skills, or you won't find them. Right, okay, so moving on rapidly. Indian tech company Ola has announced plans to open a vehicle research and development facility in Coventry, where they say they will be tapping into the fantastic automotive design and engineering talent in the UK in order to create the next generation of electric vehicles. Now, Ola claims to be the world's third largest ride hailing app, and they also make an electric scooter. This one here, it's the S1 Pro. They also have plans for an electric car, hence the development centre. The £100 million investment in what they are calling the Future Foundry will create 200 jobs in design and engineering, and they will also be researching battery technology there. Now, the scooters themselves are currently manufactured in Bengaluru in India, and frankly, since the production costs out there are significantly lower than they are in the UK, and the likes of Triumph have shipped all their production lines out of the UK. I can't imagine there will ever be a production line built in England, but certainly the benefit of a development centre is not to be sneezed at. And just to give you an idea of how serious they are about this, the company last year recruited a chap called Wayne Burgess, who's a former Jaguar designer, and he will lead the UK design team efforts. And he said basically that Ola wants to create a world-class design and R&D team with global sensibilities, and that the company will be looking at two-wheeler, four-wheeler, and other form factors. So interesting stuff there. Just to show that COVID isn't done with us yet, story I held over from last week because I was talking too much. Jack Miller's positive COVID test has postponed Ducati's MotoGP launch. It was due to have taken place Friday, 28th of January. He was due to travel to Europe, but despite being asymptomatic, he tested positive for COVID on Wednesday, 19th of January. So he's now in self-isolation, and he wouldn't have made it in to Europe in time to have taken part in what was going to be the official 2022 Ducati a Lenovo team photo shoot session. He says, I'm still in Australia and doing fine. Since I don't have any symptoms, I can at least continue with my training. Now, it's not sure whether he'll be at the first MotoGP shakedown test, which runs from tomorrow, Monday, 31st of January, to Wednesday, the 2nd of February. That's at Sepang International Circuit in Malaysia. But Michele Pirro and the Ducati test team will debut the 2022 bike there in its new livery on track for the first time this year. And the Ducati season launch event has now been moved to Monday, the 7th of February, which should give him plenty of time to recover and test negative. Likewise, there's some bad news from Down Under, as it's just been announced in the last few days that the Shiny Side Up event for this year will actually be live only, online. That is to say, the New Zealand's traffic light system has turned red, and so the live in-person events have all had to be cancelled. Now, it's not entirely unexpected. It is disappointing, and I am hoping that if all goes well, I will be one of the speakers. I'm on standby at the moment, but as COVID's messing with the whole thing, I'm still waiting to hear exactly what the speaker lineup will be. It's Shiny Side Up may be aimed at New Zealanders, but that doesn't mean that the international riding community won't benefit from attending. Obviously, if you're here in the Northern Hemisphere, on the opposite side of the world from New Zealand, we are on a slightly awkward time zone for New Zealand land, but have a look out. Last year they did actually rerun the entire event as a sort of podcast later, so pop the date in your diary. It's April the 10th, 2022. The link I've just popped up is to their Facebook page where the stream will go live on that day. As soon as I know if I've made the cut to the speaker lineup, I will also let you know. Continuing with the New Zealand theme, previously unknown film footage of Burt Munro, the New Zealand motorcycle speed legend, has come to light. The story is quite an interesting one as well. I'll just put a link up to the New Zealand newspaper which covered it. But essentially what happened here is that the store, E. Hayes and Sons, where Burt's speed breaking motorcycle is on display, were preparing for their 90th anniversary, which is fairly astonishing actually. Most stores in the UK don't stay around that long anymore. And a family member, somebody called Judy Crooks, mentioned that she knew where there was some old film footage that might be of use for the celebration. And when E. Hayes and Sons marketing manager Nick Hawes watched the movies, he found clips of Burt Munro, Irving Hayes, and his son Normal. Now, they shared a great passion for motorcycle racing generally, and racing this speed trials and things. And so they began a lifelong friendship with Burt Munro back in 1949. And it seems that Irving Hayes of the firm actually backed many of Munro's racing attempts. Now, frankly, there can't be many people who aren't aware of the story of Burt Munro. His deeds were retold, of course, in the 2005 movie World's Fastest Indian with Anthony Hopkins in the title role. But here is a still from the video footage that has been retrieved. And basically it shows Burt Munro and a young Neville Hayes loading his Indian Scout into a crate prior to his trip to Bonneville in the USA in 1962. This is when he set his first record. He set an 883cc class record of 288 kilometers per hour, which is 178 8.95 miles per hour with an engine bored out to 850cc. Neville went on to take over the running of the store. Now, the movie itself actually was fairly heavily fictionalized to make it dramatic, but the fact is, it's true that when Burt Munro made his final visit to Bonneville, he was 68. I think it was his final visit anyway, but he was riding a 47-year-old machine at that point, and he set the under 1000cc world record 26th of August 1967, and that record astonishingly still stands. Now, as his health declined, Munro sold both his machines to his friend Norman Hayes of E. Hayes and Sons, and his 1920 Indian Scout motorcycle remains on displays at E. Hayes and Sons in Invercargill, where I'm very pleased to say I've actually managed to see it. Hawes themselves himself said the company will continue to release the film clips throughout the year as part of the store's anniversary celebrations, and they would include the various footage that they have found of Burt Munro. So there's a sort of heartwarming story, really. Okay, so don't forget, you're watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses and Survival Skills. If you enjoy the show, do pop over to my coffee page and you can buy me a cuppa over there. All helps keep these shows coming, all helps me keep producing content for you to read. At the moment, there are something around 800 better biking articles over there on that page for you to read, and you can access them all for a cuppa. You get 30 days access to the vast majority of that content. Right, okay, so on to the bit that probably will upset a few people. But this all came about really because of the a combination of two things. First of all, a web link popped up on my feed aggregator, which tells me all the latest news stories, and it told me basically I want to read a new article about 5 common biking mistakes and how to avoid them. Now, I'm always happy to be educated, so I clicked and read, and I have to say I had a pretty good chuckle at the final 2 tips. Now, read alone and stripped back to the basics, they both are pretty sound pieces of advice. Mistake 4 is to assume that you've been seen, and it tells us that we shouldn't assume we've been seen and we should proceed with caution. Now, that's fine. That's part of my message from within the Science of Being Seen presentation and project. So I'm quite happy with that. Mistake 5, slightly more contentious one because it's about being self-righteous, and it talks about a sense of entitlement on the road, and the writer says it comes from being vulnerable. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but what it certainly says is that we should accept that people make mistakes, and we should aim to move ourselves onto a safer position if we feel we might be threatened. Now, again, that's sound advice in my opinion. I would say exactly the same, and that's how I teach my training courses. So what's the problem? Well, it was the juxtaposition of the 2 pieces of advice and the way that he had written. The 4th piece of advice, the one you'll recall, was about assuming that we're not seen rather than and thinking that we will be seen. He said other road users may be so engrossed in using their phones, screaming kids or banging tunes that they've got no hope of knowing you're near them. And he said basically we should treat every road user like a blind idiot that's likely to do something unpredictable and stupid at any moment. Now, obviously the irony of the juxtaposition of his piece of advice about idiot drivers and then his piece of advice about being self-righteous on the road was completely lost on both the writer and the editor who allowed that piece to be published. It was particularly pertinent actually because the second thing was that I've been running my Facebook page since 2013. That's when I started to post regularly. And I've only ever had to wield the virtual red pencil 3 or 4 times to delete comments that people have made on my posts. But unfortunately, on the Facebook posts that cover the highway code changes, I've had more on those posts than I have had in for a long time. And frankly, I think if you read those posts and read the comments, you will find that some are borderline of what I've just been talking about. We make references to brain dead pedestrians, to lycra louts. We talk about witless cages, as if there's something about our chosen mode of transport that makes us superior to everyone else on the road. Now, for starters, every single one of us is a pedestrian at some point, even if it's only parking your bike and crossing the pavement to get to the cafe. We still use the roads as pedestrians. And some cyclists also ride motorcycles too. Many racing cyclists are actually quite keen motorcyclists. And because we have two wheels, there are far more points of connection, I think, between cycling and motorcycling. And although I don't do a lot of cycling these days, I was quite keen for some years. I think there are many more points of connection between us than most motorcyclists seem keen to admit, and dare I say it, than a lot of cyclists seem keen to admit to. And of course, the other factor is that the vast majority of motorcyclists also have a car license and drive a car. Many, in fact, hold the car license before they ever get onto two wheels. And of course, for many people, the motorcycle is a subsidiary form of transport to their car as well. The bike is often used for fun. Yet again, to listen to a lot of the discussion that goes on about drivers and the contempt which literally drips from some of the comments about car drivers, you'd be hard pressed to realize that. I particularly dislike the use of the term cager for car drivers. Some people have claimed it's non-offensive and it's just a descriptive term suggesting that the driver is encased in a steel cage, but it is derogatory. It's almost always used, I would say, for negative messaging. And the moment we start with negative messaging, we are distracting from the fact that we're dealing with a human being inside that car. And that, of course, means that we then start to forget that they have the same biological functions as we do. I've said it many times. If all drivers really were as dozy and as distracted as many riders, including the author of that so-called safety tip that I've just read out, suggested, we'd never get much further than the end of the road. There are 40 million cars on the road as against 1.3 million motorcycles. Now we travel on our motorcycles something like 3 billion miles every year. If you think of the number of interfaces we have with traffic, we are passing cars every couple of seconds in a congested built up area like London. Even if you ride a sort of a fairly standard A road, there are cars around you constantly. The only time that we're really away from traffic is on really deserted roads, so sort of remote areas of Wales or Scotland or something, and we're not usually riding on those roads. So each journey we make, we're passing hundreds, if not thousands, of drivers. But when you actually count up the number of genuine threats caused by those drivers, they are remarkably rare. They just stick in our mind. What we don't remember are all the drivers we passed who saw us, who didn't put us at risk, who didn't do anything that made our life difficult. And frankly, the actual fact is that drivers are almost as likely to make a mistake in front of me when I'm in the car as they are when I'm on the bike. And again, there is research proof that suggests that from the Netherlands. They did some studies on intersection collisions, and they found that intersection collisions car to car were, when adjusted for the relative numbers of vehicles on the road, just as common as car motorcycle collisions. So it's not drivers singling motorcycles out, as we love to believe, because it makes us feel special. Drivers make mistakes in front of all vehicles. I've even been on a tram on the Isle of Man when a driver pulled out in front of the tram. So people miss the most astonishing things when they're driving. But if you want to put the boot on the other foot, don't get me started on the number of times when I have to take evasive action as a driver to avoid a motorcyclist. Now, I will point the finger at the delivery drivers that we've just been talking about as being a particular problem, but there are also the group ride outs where, again, I've had to swerve to avoid somebody who's come round the corner in the middle of an overtake, which has gone wrong because they've been following their mate. I regularly encounter group rides which are aggressive and, quite frankly, they could terrify the pants off some drivers who aren't so confident of dealing with those kind of problems as me. Motorcyclists, we really have a sort of a weird idea about car drivers. And as I said, most drivers these days take a bike training course after they've got their license. So it's a weird leap that these people make after driving a car for 10 years. Perhaps they suddenly do a 5-day direct access course. They notch up maybe 1,000 miles on their own motorcycle, and suddenly everyone else is out on four wheels is an aggressive alien species, a cager, a dozy twat out to kill them. Does that mean that the driver with that new license was similarly incompetent before they gained their their two wheels badge? I don't know. Um, I think it's strange that they want to label the other drivers on the road in the same way. Um, that's not to say that car drivers becoming fledgling bikers don't learn a lot of new things on a bike course, because they do. A recurring theme at the end of one of my direct access courses was people would come to me and say, I never realized, I never knew, I didn't understand. Because there are bike specific problems that we bikers deal with every day that aren't familiar to motorcyclists, to drivers rather. But that doesn't mean that the majority of drivers out there aren't doing a decent job. There are doubtless a few who are inattentive to the job at hand, just as there are a few psychopaths behind the wheel. But we've got both sorts in the biking world too. They just tend to meet the ghost of Darwin rather sooner on two wheels. So what seems to me to be the problem is that riders often fail to make the reciprocal leap. If a car driver moving to motorcycles discovers the problems that riders experience and are quite surprised and shocked sometimes by our vulnerability, um, riders often fail to make the reciprocal leap. Even though they often hold a car license, they will fail to understand blind spots in cars. I've lost count the number of times I've heard somebody say driver should look in his mirrors, and completely oblivious to the fact they can do exactly the same behind the wheel and fail to see a motorcycle themselves because of the blind spots. um, we fail to understand why cyclists, for example, ride for pleasure on the same roads that we want to ride on for the very same reason, to enjoy the road. The largest bodies of riders and drivers, really, and pedestrians and cyclists, are just ordinary people, average road users. They just want to get on with the job of getting from A to B with the minimum amount of fuss, and they're fallible like we are. So I think, if you want to be genuinely defensively thinking on a motorcycle, we accept that. We don't try to um, make derogatory statements about drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, believing that our skills, because we're on two wheels, are somehow superior, which is something I hear all the time, is a trap. And if we start treating other people on the road as our enemy, we are worryingly close to a ghetto mentality, which rejects rather than embraces. And once in the ghetto, getting out of it and understanding other road users by thinking ourselves inside their heads becomes next to impossible. And then consequently, our safety goes down rather than up. Don't get me wrong, I get as frustrated as anyone when I encounter road users in any of the groups who are using the roads without respect for everyone else. But I don't fall into the trap, I hope, of believing that four wheels, two pedals, or 2 feet are bad, and two wheels and a motor are better. Right, that got that off my chest. I got quite annoyed with some of the comments on the Facebook page on the highway code, and I have to say, I was very frustrated with that article that I found with the 5 better biking tips. Right, okay, so Right. Aggressive drivers are aggressive bikers. Yeah, I fear so, Samantha. I think you're probably right there. I think that people, it doesn't really matter which form of transport people are using, they will tend to be aggressive, probably aggressive pedestrians as well. All right, okay, that's it for today. I've rambled on again a little bit longer than I intended. Back on Wednesday with the next show. Finally, don't forget the Science of Being Seen. I've already mentioned that. March's event will also be Wednesday, 2nd of March. That will be on group riding, and I'll be talking you through staying out of trouble on a group ride the survival skills way. And if you want to find out a little bit more about that, here's the link to the intro on that particular one. So hopefully see you back on Wednesday for the next 11s, and hopefully a few of you might book up for the Science of Being Seen presentation, which is later that day. That is it for me today. Once again, thank you very much for looking in on today's show. And if you're out there riding today, it looks like a lovely day to go for a ride. Stay safe and shiny side up out there.